On the morning of February 28, 2026, the skies over Tehran erupted in fire and thunder as the most powerful military force on Earth unleashed Operation Epic Fury. Tomahawk cruise missiles screamed from American warships in the Arabian Sea, while Israeli F-35 stealth fighters carved through Iranian airspace with surgical precision and devastating purpose. Within hours, Iran's supreme leader Ayatollah Ali Khamenei, the man who had chanted "Death to America" for nearly 4 decades, was dead, buried beneath the rubble of his own compound. But here is the truth that the world is only now beginning to understand. Iran did not lose this war on February 28, 2026. Iran lost this war years ago through a catastrophic chain of strategic failures, economic collapse, and military humiliation that left the Islamic Republic a hollow shell long before the first American missile struck. This is the story of how the most dangerous regime in the Middle East sealed its own destruction, and why every move it made only accelerated the inevitable reckoning that arrived at its doorstep. To understand why Iran was already defeated before a single bomb fell, you have to go back to October 7, 2023, and the attack that changed everything. When Hamas launched its devastating assault on Israel that day, killing roughly 1,200 people in the worst massacre of Jewish civilians since the Holocaust, it triggered a chain reaction that Tehran never anticipated. Iran had spent decades building what strategists called the axis of resistance, a sprawling network of proxy militias designed to encircle Israel and deter any attack on the Islamic Republic itself. Hezbollah in Lebanon was the crown jewel, armed with over 150,000 rockets and missiles, capable of raining destruction on Israeli cities from just across the northern border. Hamas controlled Gaza. Palestinian Islamic Jihad operated alongside it. Shia militias dominated Iraq. The Houthis terrorized shipping lanes in Yemen, and Assad's Syria served as the critical land bridge connecting it all. For years, former Israeli Minister Naftali Bennett described this as the octopus doctrine. Iran sent its tentacles out to fight, while the head of the octopus relaxed safely at home in Tehran. But October 7th shattered the illusion of that safety, because Israel decided it would no longer just trim the tentacles. It would go after the octopus itself. Israel's response was methodical, relentless, and unlike anything the Middle East had seen in a generation, systematically dismantling Iran's carefully constructed web of proxy forces one by one. First came the devastating campaign in Gaza, where the Israeli Defense Forces ground Hamas into ruins, destroying its tunnel networks, eliminating its commanders, and rendering the organization militarily irrelevant. Then Israel turned its fury north toward Hezbollah, Iran's most powerful and feared proxy, the one group Tehran believed could single-handedly deter any Israeli strike against the homeland. In September 2024, Israel executed one of the most audacious intelligence operations in modern history, detonating thousands of Hezbollah pagers and communication devices simultaneously across Lebanon. The explosions ripped through Hezbollah's command structure in a single afternoon, blinding the organization and crippling its ability to coordinate just as Israel launched a full-scale air and ground campaign. Israel assassinated Hezbollah's legendary leader Hassan Nasrallah, killed dozens of senior commanders, and in 3 devastating months forced the group into what amounted to a military surrender. Then came the blow that Iranian leaders later admitted set their entire regional strategy back by 40 years, the fall of Bashar al-Assad's regime in Syria in December 2024. Assad's Syria had served as Iran's indispensable land corridor, a 1,500-kilometer lifeline stretching from Tehran through Iraq and Syria to deliver weapons, fighters, and cash directly to Hezbollah in Lebanon. When rebel forces led by Hayat Tahrir al-Sham stormed Damascus and toppled Assad after a lightning offensive, that lifeline was severed permanently, and Iran's strategic position in the Levant collapsed overnight. Iran's proxy forces in Syria, militia fighters who had bled and died to keep Assad in power for over a decade, were suddenly scattered, leaderless, and completely cut off from Tehran's support. By early 2025, the vaunted axis of resistance that had taken Iran decades and billions of dollars to construct lay in ruins across 4 countries and multiple battlefields. Hezbollah was gutted, Hamas was shattered, Assad was gone, Iranian proxy forces in Syria were collapsing, and only the Houthis in Yemen and some Iraqi militias retained any meaningful capability. And Iran's military humiliation was only just beginning, because in June 2025, Israel launched what became known as the 12-Day War, a conflict that exposed Iran's terrifying vulnerability. In the early hours of June 13th, more than 200 Israeli fighter jets unleashed 5 waves of airstrikes on over 100 targets across Iran, including nuclear facilities and ballistic missile sites. Simultaneously, Mossad operatives who had been embedded inside Iran activated covert drone bases near Tehran and detonated car bombs next to government buildings, killing nuclear scientists and senior military commanders. Israel eliminated at least 30 Iranian generals in the opening minutes of the attack, in operations so devastating they were internally codenamed Operation Red Wedding by Israeli intelligence planners. Iran's Russian-supplied S-300 air defense systems, which had already been badly damaged by Israeli strikes in October 2024, proved almost completely useless against the onslaught. Iran fired back with hundreds of ballistic missiles targeting Israeli cities, but roughly 90% were intercepted by Israel's layered missile defense systems with significant American assistance. Then, on June 22nd, the United States entered the fight directly, launching Operation Midnight Hammer, B-2 stealth bombers dropping massive bunker-buster bombs on Iran's deepest underground nuclear facilities. The strikes targeted the Fordo enrichment plant buried deep under a mountain, the Natanz facility, and the Isfahan Nuclear Technology Center with 14 GBU-57 bunker-buster munitions and submarine-launched Tomahawk missiles. President Trump declared that the strikes had completely and totally obliterated Iran's nuclear enrichment capabilities, and a Pentagon assessment later concluded Iran's nuclear program was set back approximately 2 years. Iran responded by launching missiles at the American Al Udeid airbase in Qatar, but Tehran had actually warned Qatar and the United States in advance, a face-saving gesture that caused 0 American casualties. The 12-day war ended with a ceasefire on June 24th, but the damage to the Islamic Republic was staggering and irreversible. Its nuclear program was crippled, its military leadership was decimated, and its deterrence was shattered. And while Iran's military was being systematically destroyed from the outside, something even more devastating was happening inside the country. The Iranian economy was imploding at a speed that shocked even veteran analysts. By late 2025, inflation had skyrocketed past 48%, food prices had surged 72%, and the Iranian rial had become the least valuable currency on the planet. In March 2025, the exchange rate passed 1 million rials to a single American dollar, a psychological milestone that sent shockwaves through Iranian society and signaled total economic freefall. The purchasing power of ordinary Iranians had fallen by more than 90% over just 8 years, and the Ministry of Social Welfare admitted that 57% of Iranians were experiencing some level of malnourishment. Meat became a luxury food item that most families could no longer afford. 7 million Iranians were going hungry, and the supreme leader actually ordered citizens to reduce their consumption of food, water, and fuel. Half of Iran's industrial capacity had ground to a halt because of rolling blackouts that struck every single day, with power going out nationwide for 3 to 4 hours as the country's energy infrastructure disintegrated. The Trump administration's maximum pressure sanctions campaign was specifically designed, in Treasury Secretary Scott Bessent's own words, to collapse Iran's already buckling economy and drive oil exports to zero. International sanctions hit from every direction. The United States imposed crippling restrictions, and in September 2025, the United Nations reimposed snapback sanctions, freezing Iranian assets and halting arms transactions worldwide. Iran's oil revenues, once the lifeblood of the regime, were largely frozen overseas, and the shadow fleet of tankers that had kept some exports flowing was being hunted and intercepted by American and allied naval forces. China still purchased over 80% of Iran's shipped oil, but even that lifeline was under enormous pressure, and the volumes were a fraction of what the regime needed to keep the country functioning. The World Bank projected that Iran's economy would shrink in both 2025 and 2026, while inflation was forecast to climb towards 60% with no relief in sight. Senior Iranian economist Masoud Neely, an advisor to former President Rouhani, described the Iranian economy as fundamentally broken by decades of corruption, lack of productivity, and disastrous over-reliance on oil revenues. Capital was hemorrhaging out of the country at a record pace. The central bank reported net capital outflows of negative $21.7 billion in the last fiscal year, the highest ever recorded in Iranian history. And then, on December 28, 2025, the Iranian people finally reached their breaking point, and the streets of the Islamic Republic erupted in the largest uprising since the 1979 revolution. It started with shopkeepers in Tehran's Grand Bazaar shutting their doors in protest as the rial crashed to a record low, but within days, demonstrations had spread to universities and cities in all 31 of Iran's provinces. What began as economic grievances rapidly transformed into a full-blown political uprising, with hundreds of thousands of Iranians flooding the streets and chanting "Death to the dictator" in direct defiance of the regime. The government's response was savage and merciless. Security forces opened fire on protesters under orders from Khamenei and senior officials, unleashing some of the largest massacres in modern Iranian history. Estimates of the death toll varied enormously, with the Iranian government acknowledging over 3,000 killed while human rights organizations put the number far higher, with some estimates exceeding 30,000 dead. The regime imposed a nationwide internet blackout, arrested thousands, and deployed overwhelming force, but the fundamental reality was unmistakable. The Islamic Republic had lost the consent of its own people. This was the Iran that existed on February 28, 2026, a nation with a shattered military, a collapsed economy, a decimated proxy network, and a population in open revolt against its own government. And it was against this backdrop of cascading catastrophe that the United States and Israel launched the most devastating joint military operation the Middle East had seen since the 2003 invasion of Iraq. Intelligence sources revealed that the timeline for Operation Epic Fury was actually accelerated because American and Israeli intelligence discovered that dozens of senior Iranian officials had gathered for a meeting in Tehran that Saturday morning. Strikes began at 9:45 in the morning Iranian time, the first day of the Iranian work week, as millions of people were commuting to their jobs and children were sitting in their classrooms. The United States deployed an armada that dwarfed anything seen in the region in over 2 decades. 2 carrier strike groups led by the USS Abraham Lincoln and USS Gerald R. Ford, supported by over 150 aircraft and dozens of warships. American forces launched Tomahawk cruise missiles from warships, fired HIMARS precision rockets, and for the first time in combat history, deployed low-cost unmanned attack drones from the newly created Task Force Scorpion Strike. Israel simultaneously executed Operation Roaring Lion, using fighter jets and precision munitions to strike targets across Tehran, Isfahan, Qom, Karaj, Kermanshah, Tabriz, and more than a dozen other cities and military installations. The initial strikes targeted Khamenei's personal compound, the Presidential Palace, the National Security Council headquarters, IRGC command and control centers, air defense systems, missile launch sites, and military airfields. Defense Secretary Pete Hegseth called Operation Epic Fury the most lethal, most complex, and most precision aerial operation in history, with hundreds of strikes carried out in just the first 12 hours alone. CBS News reported that intelligence and military sources confirmed at least 40 senior Iranian officials were killed in the strikes, though it was unclear whether they were in one location or scattered across multiple sites. Among the confirmed dead were Defense Minister General Aziz Nasirzadeh, IRGC Commander General Mohammad Pakpour, and National Security Council Secretary Ali Shamkhani, the very men responsible for directing Iran's military response. And then came the confirmation that shook the Islamic Republic to its foundations. Iranian state media acknowledged that Supreme Leader Ayatollah Ali Khamenei, the man who had ruled Iran since 1989, was dead. Israeli Defense Minister Israel Katz declared that the tyrant Khamenei was eliminated in the opening blow, and that justice was done and the axis of evil suffered a fatal blow. President Trump announced Khamenei's death on Truth Social, calling him one of the most evil people in history, and declaring that this was justice for the people of Iran and for all great Americans. The killing of Khamenei created an immediate leadership vacuum with no clear successor. For decades, the supreme leader had held final authority over all major policies, the military and the Revolutionary Guard. Iran's response, while fierce, only served to prove how isolated and desperate the regime had truly become, as it lashed out wildly in every direction against nations that had nothing to do with the attack. The IRGC launched dozens of ballistic missiles and drones not just at Israel and American bases, but at targets in the United Arab Emirates, Qatar, Kuwait, Bahrain, Saudi Arabia, and Jordan, countries that were not even party to the conflict. The UAE alone intercepted over 132 ballistic missiles and 194 drones, while a drone strike damaged Kuwait International Airport and another killed one person at Abu Dhabi's Zayed International Airport. Explosions rocked Dubai, Doha, Manama, and Riyadh as Iran attacked the very Gulf states it would desperately need as future diplomatic partners, burning every bridge it had left in a single act of strategic self-destruction. Qatar, which had served as a critical mediator between Washington and Tehran, condemned the strikes on its territory, declaring them a flagrant violation of national sovereignty, effectively ending its willingness to broker peace. Meanwhile, the United States Central Command reported 0 American combat casualties and only minimal damage to its military installations, even as it successfully intercepted hundreds of Iranian missiles and drones across the theater. The contrast could not have been more stark or more damning. America's most advanced military technology had neutralized Iran's retaliatory capability while inflicting catastrophic damage with virtually no losses of its own. Consider the sheer scale of the military mismatch that made this outcome inevitable from the very start, a gap so vast it defies comprehension in almost every measurable category of modern warfare. The United States fields over 13,000 military aircraft, including fifth-generation stealth fighters like the F-22 Raptor and F-35 Lightning. Iran's aging air force operates roughly 550 planes, many dating back to the 1970s. The American Navy deploys 11 nuclear-powered aircraft carriers, 70 submarines, and 81 destroyers capable of projecting devastating force anywhere on the planet within hours of a presidential order. Iran has 0 aircraft carriers, 0 destroyers, and relies on fast-attack speedboats and a handful of small submarines designed for coastal defense in the shallow waters of the Persian Gulf, not for fighting a superpower. America's annual defense budget exceeds $800 billion, roughly 100 times Iran's estimated military spending, funding the most technologically advanced and battle-tested fighting force in human history. Iran had attempted to compensate for this overwhelming conventional disadvantage through its ballistic missile program, the largest in the Middle East, with an estimated arsenal of over 3,000 missiles before the wars began. But the 12-day war in June 2025 and now Operation Epic Fury have systematically targeted and destroyed Iran's missile production facilities, launch sites, and the industrial base needed to rebuild them. The regime had also placed its hopes on its nuclear program as the ultimate deterrent, the one card that could make even the United States think twice before acting against the Islamic Republic. But that card was played and lost, struck first by American bunker busters in June 2025, and now targeted again as Operation Epic Fury continues to pound military and nuclear-related infrastructure across the country. Iran had tried to secretly rebuild its enrichment capabilities after the 12-day war, and satellite imagery showed new activity at previously bombed sites. But American intelligence was watching, and the rebuilding effort only provided more targets. The Iranian Foreign Minister Abbas Araghchi, in an interview with NBC News during the current strikes, said Iran was interested in de-escalation and willing to talk, then told President Trump that regime change was mission impossible. But those words ring hollow when your supreme leader is dead, your military commanders have been eliminated, your proxy network is destroyed, your economy is in free fall, and your own people are rising against you. Hezbollah, once Iran's most fearsome weapon, has not joined this fight in any meaningful way. Israel decimated its leadership and military infrastructure so thoroughly that the group simply cannot respond even if it wanted to. A June 2025 analysis from the American Enterprise Institute noted the deafening silence of Iran's proxies, confirming that the axis of resistance was either unable or unwilling to come to Tehran's defense. Iraq's Shia militias, while still capable of localized attacks, have not launched the kind of sustained campaign that could alter the strategic equation or force the United States to divert significant resources. The Houthis in Yemen remain a nuisance capable of threatening Red Sea shipping, but they lack the range, precision, and firepower to meaningfully impact operations being conducted by 2 carrier strike groups and over 150 combat aircraft. Even Iran's one remaining leverage point, the threat to close the Strait of Hormuz, through which a third of the world's seaborne oil exports pass, has proven to be more bluff than substance against American naval dominance. The IRGC Navy's 6 gunboats attempted to stop a tanker in the strait in early February, but the vessel simply continued sailing under the escort of an American destroyer, while an F-35 shot down an approaching Iranian drone. The Islamic Republic's 47-year project of building a regime capable of challenging American power in the Middle East has reached its terminal moment, undone not by a single blow but by the accumulated weight of its own catastrophic decisions. It chose terrorism over diplomacy, nuclear ambition over economic development, proxy wars over the welfare of its own citizens, and defiance over the pragmatic deal-making that might have preserved the regime's survival. President Trump, in his announcement of the strikes, offered Iranian military personnel a stark choice: lay down your weapons and receive amnesty, or face what he called certain death at the hands of American firepower. As the strikes continue and the Iranian people watch the regime that oppressed them for nearly half a century crumble under the weight of American and Israeli military power, one truth has become undeniable to the world. Iran did not just lose this war. Iran was already defeated long before the first missile launched, broken by its own hubris, hollowed out by its own corruption, and abandoned by the allies it once believed would shield it from this reckoning. The axis of resistance is gone, the nuclear program is in ruins, the economy has collapsed, the supreme leader is dead, and the streets of Tehran echo not with chants of death to America, but with the cries of a people demanding their freedom. What happens next in Iran will be written by the Iranian people themselves. But the chapter authored by the Islamic Republic's theocratic rulers has reached its final, irreversible page. The war is over, and Iran has already lost.